All right, everyone, welcome back to the Thinking Out Loud podcast. Today we have a little exquisite, a little extraordinary podcast since the geopolitics of the world has just shifted over the last 48 hours. And, obviously Trump went into Venezuela, captured Maduro. Maduro is now in U.S. soil, waiting for trial. And I thought it'd be a good idea to bring in Robert Pape, who's a professor of political science, specifically international relations here at University of Chicago, who also has recorded another podcast with us, and to just really, dissect the situation and try and understand what's going on. So, Professor, thank you for being here. And if you want to introduce
Uh,
yourself briefly.
Sure. Thank you very much, Eduardo. So, as Eduardo knows, I'm a professor at the University of Chicago. I've studied national security affairs for 30 years. I wrote a big book called Bombing to Win, studying every air campaign in history since World War I. I've studied international terrorism, occupations, regime changes, every single one since the end of the Cold War. I spent years teaching for the U.S. Air Force, teaching conventional targeting strategy before coming to Chicago. So I am very interested in speaking with Eduardo. I have had him in class. I know he's a
Oh,
very
yeah, it was a good
terrific.
time.
He's a tough inquisitor, as I know firsthand. And I also really appreciate Eduardo speaking to your audience because this whole issue, we are seeing seismic changes, not just talk of seismic changes. And this whole issue is going to be of most central importance to conservatives in the United States. And that's because they're going to determine the outcome. As much as
Uh-huh.
you may hear Democrats and independents have their own views, and you're already hearing many of those views, the fact of the matter is, we have seen since President Trump has come into office, he pays very little, if any, attention to those views. If anything, he may double down in certain positions based on those. But it really is going to be the case that the constituency that matters most for American foreign policy is a big part of your audience. So I really do appreciate getting an opportunity to talk with you.
Yeah, no, well, thanks for being here, and it should be a good conversation. But so first thing, just to give some context. So Trump has been engaging with Venezuela for quite a while now. So now last year, since we're at the beginning of the year, last year, of course, he was bombing ships in the Caribbean, and he seized an oil tanker off the coast of Venezuela a few months ago. Were you expecting such an escalation so quickly? And is this something that was on your timeline, or how did you feel about that first reaction?
Actually, this is pretty close to what I thought was going to happen, Eduardo. In fact, I have a center, the Chicago Project on Security and Threats, and just before we took our Christmas break, I was talking to them specifically about may be coming here. I didn't know it would exactly come at this day, but it would be really quite stunning to see the buildup of such a gigantic armada of 30 plus ships. And it's not just simply the ships, but we need to put in, there are 10,000 Marines on these ships.
Yep.
So this is a force that is put together that is not just a few battleships off of the coast of Caracas. This is a gigantic armada, the likes of which we've never really ever put together in our hemisphere. You might think of this as something the size of what we did with the Navy portion of the first and second Gulf Wars in 1991 and 2003. That is over in the Middle East, but
Yeah.
nothing like this has really happened in
In our
the Western
hemisphere.
Hemisphere.
Yeah. Interesting. And just on this question, I tend to be very dovish, and most of my friends tend to be very dovish on foreign policy. And to this point, Trump, and especially in his first campaign in 2016, he really stood out as, why are we still in Iraq? Why do we go in Iraq? Why are you still in Afghanistan? Why are we wasting billions of dollars abroad and wasting American lives abroad for a war that has nothing to do with us? And over the last day or so, I've been talking to a few friends of mine, and we've been having really interesting discussions of, are we going back to the forever wars? Is Trump going back on his uh, dovish, American first foreign policy, and are we going back to the Bush years, put it that way? And I, I don't know how I feel about that because I'm trying to understand how this operation falls within the spectrum of Iraq and Afghanistan, where there's a multi-year, multi-step nation building process in one hand, and then you have Operation Midnight Hammer or something, which is one precise strike, very targeted operation aimed to do one specific thing, in this case, take down Maduro, and then the US is out of the country. How do you see this operation uh, in the lens of American interventionism? Do you think it's going to lead to a new era of interventionism, or do you think it's a specific targeted thing?
Well, I do think, Eduardo, we are heading toward a new forever war. And I'm going to talk to you about that in some detail, what that trajectory will likely, how it will unfold. But I think it's important to start with some of the basics here, which is you're quite right to feel whiplash. During not just this campaign, but for years, President Trump, and as candidate Trump, he talked a lot about ending forever wars, not doing nation building, and essentially what people came to understand as America first, which would be America not involved in foreign regime change, intervention, overseas endeavors, and focused really on building up the American economy, the American homeland. And this is really not that. So people will try to square this circle, but I don't think this is really the place to go. Now, that said, it's important to understand that as President Trump spoke, and by the way, going back to my expectations, what I was telling my CPO senior researchers was given the 10,000 Marines on the Armada, this was going to be a battle for oil. This was not going to be
Yeah,
seize the country a la Iraq. This was not going to be a new democratization project. This was not going to be about changing the lives of 25, 28 million Venezuelans. This was going to be about taking the oil. Now,
yeah,
President Trump yesterday, in his speech, he said that in exactly those words.
yeah, he
He
did.
left no doubt. The one thing we know about President Trump is he speaks exactly what is on his mind. So he is not holding back, and he is clarifying that this is about oil. And in fact, that's why he has kind of moved away from this word of regime change. Because you see, I think Eduardo, in his mind, he doesn't think he's changing the regime. He thinks he's reorienting the regime that is still there, absent Maduro himself, in order to have America have access and actual control over Venezuela's oil. That's really the centerpiece of this whole thing. That was true from the armada that he built. That's been true from the actions of snatching Maduro. And that is what he states as his key purpose. So, what is occurring here, I don't think you're going to see an effort here if there are more troops that go in or troops that go on the ground. It's important to see that this is going to go after the oil fields. They're not, I'd be shocked if you see an effort to control Caracas, for example. That would require 150,000 troops. This would be the large scale wars that he said he didn't want to get involved in. Now, that said, and we'll talk more about this, Eduardo, I don't think these hopes are really going to pan out. It's not, you have to remember, it's not fully just up to President Trump how limited this whole thing. The folks here in Venezuela are going to have something to say about this. And so, but that really helps to, I think, kind of get a sense of what's going on in his thinking. He's going for the oil. And the real questions here for American interests in America first are number one, are we ever going to control that oil? just because he says he wants that oil and we run the country, are we actually going to ever control? And then number two, what does this mean for our primacy? What does this really mean for our primacy? We already know he's jettisoning liberal norms. So we don't have to have
Yeah.
this big conversation. Is he jettisoning liberal norms? The question is this really going to make America the central leading power in the world going forward, which most protects our security?
Yeah. To that point, I think you touched on something really important. You said there's not going to be an effort to take Caracas. There's not going to be an effort to do the nation building. You're only going to care about the oil and enforce the American interest there. From all I've seen online and talking to people that have family in Venezuela or people that are from Venezuelan descent, everyone's pretty happy that Maduro's gone. That seems like a very certain thing to say at this point. And taking that's for granted, is it a bad thing that we're doing it for oil? For oil? I know it sounds like a taboo to ask, but if they're happy that we're there, if they're happy Maduro's gone, and if we're happy we're getting oil, and as you said, without putting a lot of troops on the ground, we're not going 200,000 troops, 150,000 troops, and presumably with that, without spending a lot of money on it, is it a bad thing that we're getting more oil, isn't it a, a pro for both sides?
Well, so first of all, there's no doubt Maduro is a bad actor. So this is
Oh
not
yeah, for
there's
sure.
really
Yeah.
not, we just got to make sure we set the table here.
No, yeah, but
There's nobody who really
what I
believes that
what I aim
he's
with
a
that
good
is that
actor, and he's an illegitimate president. He did not win the election. In fact, there's something like 70% of support for the opposition candidate here,
yeah.
as best we can tell. The real problems here, Eduardo, in terms of how the population is going to think about this are going forward, not just today. So when we toppled Saddam Hussein in Baghdad, there was a tremendous amount of love in the air, so to speak, and that lasted for a period of weeks, if not several months. The problem is, however, that now this isn't just removing a bad actor. The truth of the matter is, um, whether we want to sort of fully understand this or not, we break it, we buy it, we own it, which means as problems start to emerge in the future, those responsibilities going to rest on America's shoulders. So that as we go forward, for example, what really is going to happen with oil revenues here? Right now, there's still an economic blockade on Venezuela here. But what's really going to happen with these revenues is the public going to actually see a better economic life? And much the way that you saw after the President Trump won the 2024 election, and then a large part of even his own supporters were disappointed because their lives were not improving. I'm sorry to say you're likely to see even more that situation here going forward because it's going to be one thing to be glad there's a bad actor that's gone, but there's now going to be the question of is life actually getting better for people in Venezuela?
So it's
And that's
about
not now on Maduro's head, that's on
yeah.
Trump.
So it's basically about how long we can keep them happy because now they're euphoric, right? Now they're big bad guys now gone. How long can we keep them happy, basically? And that
That
requires
that's
some
that's
nation building.
that's
Yeah.
exactly right. And the problem that we face is that
Interest.
even in the fastest time to try to generate more oil, rebuild oil infrastructure, and improve it, we're talking many months here at the fastest,
Oh yeah, for
Eduardo.
sure.
And that means that there's going to be lots of things happening to the population in Venezuela during this period of time. And they're going to start to ask, what about us? What's happening for us? President Trump said, the United States now run the country. So it makes perfect sense then for people to start to ask, What is America doing for Venezuelans? Now that is going to, as that starts to become louder and louder, you can already start to hear the MAGA supporters in the United States starting to get more and more concerned. Well, wait a minute here. Is this really about helping Venezuela? I thought this was about America first, helping, and that meant blue collar America first. So there is going to be this wicked tension
Yeah.
going forward. And I'm sorry to say, I think President Trump isn't going to be able to make either side happy here as this goes forward because the money is unlikely to come quickly within a period of even 6 months from the oil.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But so in that case, wouldn't it be smarter for I know there's other concerns in that, but maybe let Maria Corina Machado uh or someone in Maduro's opposition take the government and let the responsibility be on their shoulders and then strike a deal to have American oil companies explore the fields.
So,
Wouldn't
so
that be
this
smarter
was
to say?
effectively the position of John Bolton in the first Trump administration. Because, see, the last time we thought about this was actually the first Trump administration. We got close to doing, quote, the regime change option here when John Bolton was Trump's national security advisor in 2018, and 19. And so but what happened here? Well, you have to see it though from the perspective of what Trump has just told us. People are wondering, they're asking this on CNN. They've interviewed John Bolton about this. Here's the answer, which is if you want to run the oil, you don't give it to the opposition. Trump's position here is not he takes away a bad actor and then he lets another actor come in and they decide independently of Trump what to do with that oil. That's not what he said. He was very, very clear that it's going to be a judicious handoff here. And he deliberately dissed the Nobel Peace Prize winner, who you might have thought he was going to embrace. And in fact, many of the conservatives in the first Trump administration are arguing for that to this day. I don't think that's going to happen. And the reason I don't think it's going to happen, Eduardo, is he wants the oil. He wants to control that oil. In fact, I think there's another possibility that's going to come in the next few weeks is you remember President Trump talked about a sovereign wealth fund for the United States. I think you're going to start to hear discussions of this reemerge because if you start to think about the national security strategy just came out where he wants to control the Western Hemisphere, you look at all the speeches he's given where he wants Greenland, he wants those resources because we need those resources. You look at Canada, he talked about changing the line of Canada. Well, what's on the other side of that line is Canada's oil. So you look at all of this now more clearly, and this is now you can start to connect these dots. You can start to see that he's got a very, I think, clear image of controlling resources in the Western Hemisphere by the United States. This is imperialism 101. This is not, he's not sugarcoating it. And the question is, can he make this of value to MAGA? I think he will try. I think he's going to run into the realities of the world here. The world is not, even with 20, we have 26% of the world's GDP. We are the most powerful economic and military force on the planet, multiple times over, even stronger than China. So, but at the same time, what he is asking to do is to basically become a new imperialist power, and the resources for resistance here have just grown since the 19th century. We are not back in the 19th century, not just because we have planes now and we didn't have them then. It's because the powers of resistance to imperialism and occupation are substantially higher than they were in the days of McKinley. And I'm afraid he's going to find out about this, and we are going to pay that price in spades.
Yeah, talking about resistance, I mean, you talked about this resistance going to be bad. It's going to be really strong if Trump doesn't take care of the Venezuelans, because then they're going to be asking questions about how is that helping the people on the ground, right? How do you see the situation for the everyday Venezuelan? Say Trump takes over, or whatever, the opposition takes over, which seems increasingly unlikely. Do you see a power vacuum coming over? Do you see maybe some anarchy coming over like we did in Libya, like we saw in Iraq, like we saw in Afghanistan, or do you see a more controlled environment like we saw in
Well,
Panama or of
Venezuela's already been in a weak anarchical environment here. The
course,
Maduro
yes. But they
regime
had a
has
strong
not
leader
been.
to keep people on leash, right?
Exactly. And so
Yeah.
what happens when you topple these strong men, and we know this, is then the separate power centers underneath them start to vie among themselves. So you could probably imagine there will be centers within the military that will start to compete with centers in intelligence, which will start to compete with some of the more political components of the government already. And we may be trying to play those off against each other. I wouldn't be surprised. We already had the CIA in, we mapped Maduro's daily behavior and routine. So we knew very precisely where he was. We were able to shoot to death all of his security guards without killing him. That all comes with detailed knowledge of what's happening in the inner workings here. So I'm not going to be surprised that we will know about this, but they will start increasingly to compete among themselves to take over the strong top position here. And so that will start to create fissures. The bigger problems here, though, for America and then for the population are going to be that the oil itself is the gold, is the key resource here in the country and for Trump. And so what that means is this whole idea that you're going to send in oil companies and you're going to send in civilian contractors here and you're going to start to get more out of this. They will be highly vulnerable to guerrilla warfare tactics, terrorism. And Venezuela is primed for guerrilla warfare and terrorism. You just look at the terrain. This has
Yeah.
got the jungles of Vietnam, the mountains of Afghanistan, has no open sand like
And the
in the
drug
Middle East
cartels
and
of
Iraq.
Mexico and
Yeah,
Colombia.
this is just perfect. There's already all these armed groups running around. You are going to find that getting that oil out in a stable way, I'll be surprised if the oil companies will even go in this situation here. You would put in not just 10,000 troops just in the oil regions, but probably 50,000 troops in the oil regions. And even then, those troops are going to be pinged and ponged, and you are going to see this is where the real dilemma is going to be. How are you actually going to, right now, the word is run the country. I say, how are you actually going to get that oil? This is much more precise for Trump. And I think it's going to be precise also for the people in Venezuela because without those proceeds coming, Trump's not bailing them out. There's no sign that he's going to pour money out of the American spigots here. There's no USAID coming to their rescue. You see what I mean? So the only way those Venezuelans will benefit maybe is if that oil comes out, and that's going to be fought over viciously by the different groups inside of Venezuela.
So what you're saying is that there's basically no chance of the US getting its objectives without risking a large engagement.
Without risking a larger engagement than they have planned for by
Yeah,
far.
exactly.
Because
Yeah.
again, you can look at what's on those ships. 10,000 Marines. So if you want to know what is coming, the dirty secret is the military plans, and they put forward things in staging areas. So you will be able to tell weeks, if not months in advance, what the operation is they are planning by looking at the details on those ships. Now, most people don't know enough about military affairs to be able to look at a set of ships and say, what is that armada built to do? And that's what that armada was always built to do. It's basically the first rung of the Marine expedition to control the pipelines and the oil fields in the initial wave. If the And I'm saying that this is unlikely to be enough. And the reason is because Venezuela is too big, it's primed for guerrilla resistance. And this is not even just having troops here, it's not going to be safe enough for those civilian contractors to suck that money out of the oil. And I think that's really going to be the ultimate big problem that President Trump is going to face. And I think that this is why we're really, really now in a serious challenge going forward. The other thing I want to say is that there's a second issue that's going to be important in the coming weeks, which is treasury sales. So one of the big things that we know is that foreign governments buy a lot of U.S. treasuries here.
Yeah.
And when Trump had Liberation Day on April 2nd, one of the big things that happened a week later, which is when Scott Bessent ran storming into the Oval Office, was when the Japanese and South
They
Koreans, not
sold
just the
all their
Chinese,
bonds.
started selling bonds. And that started to look, and if you want to see a real run on inflation and a real collapse of the stock market, when those bonds don't sell, what do you have to do, Eduardo? Raise the coupon rate. You've got to raise interest rates. In other words, right now, those bonds are selling at about 4.8%. If those rates go even up to 5.5 or 6%, the stock market's in deep trouble. So we are going to see very dangerous times, not because the stock market on Monday or Tuesday necessarily going to collapse. The real thing that's going to happen here is we're going to have to watch the bond market. This, again, it's a technical, sophisticated, expert issue, much like knowing about insurgency. But these are the issues here that are coming forward. Insurgency against the oil and lack of bond purchases by major governments, our allies. Why is Denmark or Canada helping to buy bonds when we're going to take Denmark's land in Greenland, possibly? Why is that happening? You see, this is going to be a
How
real.
do you really
Why
think
is
they're gonna think
Japan
that?
going to help us out when we're basically given almost a green light to Xi to go ahead? You want Taiwan? We're busy. So this is not really going to be a conducive environment for America's primacy going forward. These are the danger points we're sitting on.
Well, I think it's a little far-fetched to say Denmark is going to sell their bonds because now they're
I'm not
dismissing the
saying
U.S.
that. I'm saying, why are
because
they
they're
going to
still
help
relying on
buy
our
the bond?
bonds.
Why are
Yeah.
they going to help? But you've got to look at it as what's really we can't, bond trading is not a science. Nobody knows it for sure. But what I'm telling you is there are real consequences here, and the rest of the world is seeing that America has decided on its own, without facing any imminent threat or even far off threat from Venezuela, to take Venezuela's oil. And
But
this is
that's
going to have consequences for how they think about working and economically trading with America.
yeah. But I mean, we've already done that. Not in this way, but the situation in Libya was pretty similar. You know, we didn't say we're gonna go after Gaddafi and bomb Benghazi because of oil, but at the end of the day, everyone kind of knew it was for oil. And
Well, what
still,
happened in Libya, so I was there at the time and I was involved with some of the actors in Washington and so forth. What happened in Libya is that the Obama administration started with a very limited idea of saving Benghazi, which was a big city, was about to
yeah,
have a giant massacre. And they bombed 800, about 40 vehicles, killed about 800 Libyan members of the Gaddafi's regime that was going to kill a bunch of thousands of people in Benghazi. Well, then what happened is the Europeans, we handed off this because we said we want to lead from behind. That is, we don't want to be controlling this. Well, when we handed it off, we discovered the Europeans, they wanted to take down Gaddafi bad because they were really, really angry about things Gaddafi had been doing the previous 10 years. So they saw this as an opportunity to take down Gaddafi, and we didn't stop them, and we let that go. And then, yes, that created a problem here. So this was where the Europeans were directly involved in the regime change. It's not like they were standing aside. They were actually leading the charge against Gaddafi, not so much Obama. Now, back to Venezuela, this is a different story here. The Europeans are not just caught by surprise, they're likely terrified about what's coming here because this is Trump has been talking about taking resources here in Panama, in Greenland, and Canada. And then in recent months, he's not talked about Venezuelan oil directly, but he's built that armada. And then what does he do? He does the big action in Venezuela and then directly clarifies everything. It was always about the oil. This is going to make the Europeans and others in Asia, the people who buy those bonds, pretty nervous about buying those bonds and supporting it. Now, what typically happens is they typically lower their purchases or let the interest rates rise. And that's the danger here, is that the interest rates will rise over the next month. I hope that does not happen because that would be bad
Yeah.
for America's primacy. But this
Uh-huh.
is not a far-fetched idea because this is what happened last April.
Yeah. But uh so you talked about oil and you talked about how hard it's going to be, and we're now talking about how this is going to affect the US economy. How fast or how economically important is going to be the new oil coming in from Venezuela? Because they have a huge reserve. We're going to be able to explore a lot of it if, of course, we don't have a lot of insurgents stopping us from doing so. How actually important is going to be this new oil for the everyday American or for even American gas supplies?
Well, it only matters. So Venezuela can add something like there are about 100 billion barrels of oil traded every day, and Venezuela might be able to add 500,000 when those kind of things are repaired and improved. So they can add a little bit, but the price of oil here, based on even the most optimistic assessments of adding, opening spigots in Venezuela, is going to be modest at best. You're already seeing, by the way, as Trump has done drill, baby, drill, that oil prices, gasoline prices have come down in the United
Yeah,
States
they
over
have,
the
yeah.
last year. It has gotten much attention because other things like eggs are not going down, but still, the price of gas has gone down. This will probably maybe at most add a tick to that, but it's not going to be a major change. The real issue here, though, is going to be that, as you just said, even getting the profits from that to go directly to Americans. That's going to be the challenge, which is right now, a lot of those profits would be going to Venezuela. And that's now really going to have to be up to Trump. And it's going to be very, very surprising if ultimately President Trump decides not to have a significant portion of those profits go to the oil companies themselves, and then to secondarily some American citizens. And I wouldn't be surprised if Venezuelans are third on the list here if they ultimately are there at all. That, of course, all presumes there's any profits to really be had.
Yeah. Just something that I think is important to bring back to the discussion of how shocked the world is at this engagement. Bush Sr. did something really similar in Panama with Noriega in the 90s, and same thing. He was accused of I think drug trafficking, which is similar to what Maduro's been accused of. They went in Panama, they got him, and it seemed like it wasn't a big deal. It didn't seem like
Yeah,
everyone was pissed
Panama
off.
wasn't a big deal because Panama is a very, very tiny country. It's got only a tenth of population. It's
So it
got
is
a
about
tenth.
scale.
It's about the scale,
Okay.
and it's also there's no oil. There is the
No, that's
Panama
true, but
Canal, but it's not a. This
but it
is
seems like you're talking about of course there is the problem of oil, but part of what's driving your concern about international relations and how countries are going to engage with the US, specifically the bond market, is about legitimacy of our engagements.
legitimacy and that we are becoming a predator.
Okay.
So what America first is turning into is America as predator. Now that's different. So we've had America as sort of guarantor for the
Top.
world.
Yeah.
We've had America as doing social work for the world. We've had America as supporting allies. Then we've had positions of restraint, which is let's pull back from some of that. So a lot of that energy is not actually serving America ultimately, and that's that position of restraint that I've had for decades here. So I'm one of the leaders of this. This has been I've been supporting restraint even before it was called restraint, starting in 2014. So you can look back at the Chief of Naval Operations in 2010. He's clearly, we called it offshore balancing, and that was a way to sort of pull back from some of these heavy military engagements and overseas missions. Here, what's happening though is that we now have a new position. We never really had the position of America as imperialist or America as seizing the economic assets of others. That's a different position here. Maybe in the 19th century, yes, under McKinley, we did do some of this tiny ways, but this was a much different world in the 19th century. We're now in a world where the opportunities to push back against us are much more severe. But this is a position, Eduardo, that we really don't have when we teach courses on grand strategy. We
Yeah.
don't have this position of America as seizing economic assets of other countries. That's called imperialism. It's called predator. And that is going to become now a new debate, a new discussion. And it's one that we need to think really long and hard about because it has effects for how others, whether or not how we can actually succeed in doing that or what it would mean and the cost of doing that. And it also has a lot of effect about isolating us from the world in much more severe ways, where it's not up to our control. We like the idea that we're in control of how much we're engaged with the world. Well, increasingly, the world is going to say, we don't really care what you Americans think about this. We're going to decide how much we relate to you or not. And we're going to start to take steps to distance ourselves so we have more latitude to make those decisions on our own.
Yeah. On this topic of relating to other countries, I think it's interesting to think about how we're gonna engage with the Middle East now. Because, of course, a lot of our engagement in Iran and in other countries in the Middle East was also for oil. We have to protect our allies in Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait, in these oil producing countries because we import a lot of oil from them. But now that, in a few months these oil fields in Venezuela are going to be operational, don't you think we're going to be more autonomous? Autonomous, I mean, in this side of the Atlantic. We won't be relying on so far away
I think we're
countries.
starting to
How do
see.
you see
So in
that?
the last year, since President Trump has come into office, I think he's bombed or taken military action against 7 countries. And I think that
Uh,
this is really quite a large number. I don't know if I can get the full list here, but it's
we have
Iraq,
Yemen,
Syria,
Iran,
Iran, Yemen. Of course,
Venezuela.
Venezuela would count, and I'm probably missing one or two showing. So I think we see that with Iran, I think what President Trump is thinking about is effectively another drive-by shooting with B-2s, this time probably oriented against killing leaders in the regime. Wouldn't be surprised if that's what he meant by cocked and loaded here, which is he had B-2s ready to go. And that's been what his go-to has been is strategic air power. It used to be called global power, global reach with B-2s. That was the
Yeah.
original concept when the B-2 came out. And I think he likes that idea. Venezuela is a different story. You see, so I think what you're going to see in the Middle East here is probably he will probably occasionally do global power, global reach with B-2s, air power, long distance. However, what his national security strategy that just came out says, and what he is doing is he's saying he's going further in the Western Hemisphere. He's going to actually have
Yeah,
military control over resources in the Western Hemisphere. That's not what he has been saying anywhere else in the world, where he's going to use the military to control resources in, say, the Middle East. So I don't think
yeah.
that's going to
But what
happen.
what I'm trying to get at is, doesn't this control or influence over Venezuela, doesn't this increase American primacy because we're now relying on other countries that are not really within our reach?
Well, American primacy. So a big measure of this is very simply America's gross domestic product as a share of the world's product. In 1990, when the Cold War ended, America was 22% of the world's gross domestic product. Today, we're 26% of the world's gross domestic product. So our primacy rose during that period of time. Now, our competitors, you could even look at Europe. Europe fell by 40% of share of world's economic power, and China was the one actor who grew. So that's why I think that we should be thinking about the competition vis-a-vis China and Asia. But if you talk about primacy here, notice that that growth from 22 to 26% of the world's share of world economic power. That growth occurred with good relations here with Europe, with that world of alliances and institutions that President Trump has now ripped to shreds. So he's really quite ripping these to shreds. We're still nominally a part of the UN. We're nominally a part of NATO, but the teeth are just simply gone, and increasingly nobody really takes this seriously. And if you can start to see, if President Trump starts to use has now started to use force in reality, not just in terms of discussion here. This is going to change how the world thinks about us. That's why, Eduardo, I was talking about these economic relationships, because underneath our primacy, the primacy of our terrific military, which is the best in the world by far,
Yeah, it's behind
is
that's the US dollar,
economic
right?
power. And that economic power hinges tremendously on having tentacles in the rest of the world. We may not like the fact that today modernization is a global phenomenon, but it is. And we've reaped the benefits of that for 35 years. And now we're going forward on a bet. And the bet is, okay, let's throw that all away. That's demonstrated success. And let's bet on the fact that maybe this will be better. Well, this is a huge bet. And I don't see signs that it's going to work out.
Yeah, I mean, NATO did step up payments a lot, and we've been seeing better relations with some of these countries since a lot of them fell apart in March or April last year when we had Zelensky over the White House. It was a big scandal, and I think these are naturally healing. I want to see how they're gonna look at what happened in Venezuela. I'm not really sure they're gonna be as pissed as you think they are, because we've been ignoring UN for a little while. And
I hope, Eduardo, that rosy scenario
well,
comes to
hopefully, I mean,
pass. The problem is that the world is a very rough and tumble place. President Trump's always talking about how the other leaders are tough guys and they kind of squeeze the most they can for themselves. There's just golden opportunities now that we're handing them. If anything, the world is moving toward a much more dangerous spheres of influence world, where you have Russia growing a sphere of influence in Europe, China growing a sphere of influence in Asia, America a sphere of influence in the Western Hemisphere, Israel a growing sphere of influence in the Middle East. And what you're seeing is in those areas, except for Asia so far, violence. Violence. And that violence has not come down since President Trump took office. In three of those four regions that I just articulated, the violence is higher than when he took office. The one that's not is Asia.
Oh, what about the Middle East with Gaza and
It's higher.
Israel?
It's substantially
Okay,
higher
yeah.
than when he took office because of
Really?
Iran, and also if you just look at all the activity that's happened in Yemen here and Israel's bombing, Israel since Trump has come into office, Israel was already doing an awful lot on its own, but Israel has just become even more emboldened since President Trump took office. And I don't see President Trump. He is not giving like a complete green light to Israel to just do anything. He pulled Israel back from ethnic cleansing in Gaza. But that said, he's given a lot of green lights to Israel, and I think that that's likely to be the case. I'm not sure he'll go for ethnic cleansing of Gaza, but I think that he's given Israel quite a wide berth here, and the idea that he's really going to stop another, say, bombing campaign by Israel in Iran, I just find that hard to believe.
Yeah. So I think we're wrapping up here. I have a final question for you just to sum everything up. Uh, Marco Rubio and Trump have talked about U.S. foreign policy as we're only going to do it if it makes America richer, more powerful, or safer. I think those are the three. And I was thinking, do you think this new development is going to make America richer, more powerful, and safer? And, talking about the Venezuelans a little bit, do you think that's also going to be Venezuela? It's going to be good for Venezuela over the next, 2 to 5 years as they reshuffle their government and their institutions. How do you see that?
No, I'm not optimistic. I think that America is going to be poorer. I think America is not going to be safer. And I think that unfortunately for the Venezuelans, as bad as they've had it, I think the best case for them is it holds the line. I think that the most likely case, however, is that there's chaos in the country because the fact of the matter is, this was already a shaky regime. He just broke a big part of the regime. There's a lot of actors here who are going to scramble, as always happens when you have these dictators who leave. And the oil resource just makes this all the worse for that set of outcomes. And that's also why I don't think this is going to make us richer. I just don't believe that we are going to see these proceeds, even in 3 or 4 months here, from the oil. I think it's just going to be too difficult here because the actors inside of Venezuela, they're all going to want their piece of that action. There's not going to be much left for us, if any at all.
Oh, interesting. What about safer? Trump has talked a lot about the drugs coming in from Venezuela. How do you think that's going to impact now?
Well, the thing that you have to worry about now that we've gone in and we have imposed political control, at least some political control in the country, is that political control is the heart of what it means to militarily occupy a country. That's what that means, Eduardo. So military occupation isn't defined by the number of troops on the ground. It's defined by who controls the government, because the government is what runs the country. So what that means is when you have occupations, as you know, I've studied all of these occupations by democracies and others. This is one of the big things I do. What you end up with is provoking terrorism. So what we have to worry about is not is you have Trende. Let's just pick Trende Agua, just one of the criminal gangs here that could be an issue. We know that we have Venezuelan criminal gangs in the United States. What could happen is you could now start to see them evolve somewhat and start to become politically motivated actors inside the United States, not just criminal gangs. And that would create a new wave of a terrorist threat that we haven't seen. We really haven't had to worry about a terrorist. We've worried that the Middle Easterners might come through Mexico or through Latin America to attack America. We haven't really worried about Central American or Latin American terrorists themselves coming and attacking us. And that is something that is going to be on the horizon as we control the government and as the government, as that control doesn't work out well for Venezuelans. They will just support violence against Americans because they will see, well, Trump said, America runs the country. If we're not better off, why aren't we punishing America?
Well, fair enough. We'll just have to wait and see how that plays out. Let's hope, let's hope we're better
I
off for
hope
that.
I'm, Eduardo, I hope I'm wrong, but had
Yeah.
very much the same conversation, not on podcasts, but on media that your listeners can find right after we conquered Iraq and right after
Yeah.
we had, so what we're seeing is unfortunately an old movie play itself out. These are the early stages. Everybody says, let's wait and see. Well, in large part because we have no real choice but to wait and see. The odds of President Trump doing a 180 on this and putting Maduro back in power are zilch. That's not going to happen. JD Vance is nowhere to be seen right now, so we'll see if he stands up and says, "Yes, this is what I always supported as America first." We'll see. But at the moment, I think that we are, unfortunately, as all Americans, whether supported Trump or not, we are now on the hook for what's happening in Venezuela. It's not just President Trump, MAGA, and the Trump administration.
Well, thank you very much for coming, Professor. This has been great. A lot has happened in the last few hours, and it's good to have your opinion on all of this. And I hope our audience had a lot of information to think about.
It's been a pleasure, and it's always great to interact with you in or out of class.
Oh, thank you. I'm honored, but thank you, Professor. And for you, the audience, thanks for watching. Hope you'll be back for next time. Thank you.